Hello, everyone, and welcome to the World Explorers podcast. This is the podcast where we take a random prompt and we make an entire world around it. My name is Casey. I'm joined always by Isaac, and this week we have a special guest.
Hello, my name is the Nameless One.
Anyway, so today we are world building a city. And this city, essentially the idea that I came up with for it was that it sees everyone that's living within it. Like the city is sentient. And it is looking for evildoers, and it punishes criminals and people that it deems immoral. I haven't fully come up with an idea of like what these punishments could be. Does it kill them? Does it imprison them, torture them? Whatever. But that's what I was thinking we could build off of.
The moment you said that, my first thought was that the ground just opens up and swallows them.
I mean, that's one thing. That's definitely
Cities
one thing.
of giant mimic say what?
Yeah, kinda, pretty much.
With D&D, there's actually precedents for a mimic the size of a city. So there's something you could. Some of them are capable of speech and sapient thought as well.
Well, we don't necessarily need to limit ourselves to pre-existing world building and stuff like what you might find in D&D. We're building our own world. We could call this a mimic if we want to add mimics into the world. But at least
So are we trying to do fantasy or sci-fi?
Whatever it turns out into.
Yeah, it's just sort of whatever it turns into. I was thinking fantasy with this one, but if it somehow ends up being sci-fi, we could do that too.
Yeah. So do we want to start with like what precedents exists in which the city suddenly decides this person is no longer worthy to live?
Okay, so that is something I was wondering about. Like, what is the moral judgment, and like, what does the city deem moral and immoral? Because this could be an insane city where it's like even the slightest hint of, say, like a little argument might get you in trouble with this city, where you start shouting at somebody. A little, like, school bullies could get in serious trouble, or it could be you have to do something serious, like, say, rob a bank or murder someone or something along those lines. That's sort of what
So either psychopath crime coefficient or reaction based.
Yeah.
Yes. And I was thinking about it, seeing everything that people do. And another thing I was wondering about was, what if people found a way to bypass what it saw, like a way that they could sort of disguise themselves, or maybe do something in such a subtle way that the city would be unaware of their crimes.
So, out of curiosity, is this city like included in the building? So, is this like an area, and you add something into the area, and then suddenly that just becomes part of the sentient being? Or is it's very much confined in an area, so there's like buildings on the outskirts and stuff in which it are detached from it? Because also there's the whole thing, if you're going to create a city like this, you have to make a reason for people to want to live in said city. Because I know if I was stuck in a city in which if I made a mistake, it would eat me, I wouldn't want to live there anymore. I would want to go to some place that's a bit more forgiving of things. So there has to also be a reason why people are stuck inside the city.
It could be an option. It could be more of a thing where people actually choose to live in the city for protection, because it might be a situation where if they're in the city, they know that they are safe because they say, "Oh, I'm the good guy. The city would never harm me."
I guess there's no crime here.
That would require the city to not be psychotic and punishing and killing people for every little thing.
Here's an idea. Without getting into the details of what the city is yet, if it is more than just a city, a religious organization of some sort that is basically the de facto religion left after some sort of apocalyptic, I can English, apocalyptic event. And it's not very hospitable outside of the city, but if you're part of the religion, you get a free pass into the city. Other people can join as well, but they have to go through like rigorous paperwork, whatever, bureaucracy, what have you. And then certain individuals could have, say, a amnesty from the city itself. So certain high-ranking officials
just do what they want.
Yeah.
They're not affected. I like the idea of it being part of like a religion. I mean, especially it would, like, if you have a city that has a moral code, a religion or something along that line is going to be built upon that, because these are the laws of the land, and it's not deemed by people, it's deemed by a deity that you just happen to live inside.
Okay, so the city is perhaps some sort of god, or something along those lines.
It would be a good reason for people to want to live there too. Like, you know, if you're part of this religion, then you're not going to leave the city in which your god reside. Like, you want to be inside your god. It sounds weird. Don't take me out of context. But you know, they want to be close to their god, and they want to be sure that they're following the rules, so they continue to live inside of it.
Yeah, I could see that definitely being the case. Now, if they were living inside of the city, like, what is the reason for joining this religion? Okay, like you were saying, the outside might be like an apocalyptic wasteland, but is there any way that people would... Is it so bad that people can't go out and form their own separate city, and it is to a point where they would choose to live inside of this city?
Let's see.
Like, why not go out and rebuild? Is it, like, is there like a toxic gas or something beyond the city? Is there,
I guess it kind of depends on like what type. Yeah, it depends on like what type of story you want to write. So if you want a story that's very much confined to the city, where people are not always happy living in the city, but they're kind of stuck there, and you want that dynamic, then obviously you'd want something outside the city preventing people from leaving. But if you're interested in having more of an adventure-related thing of people going in and out of the city and other societies existing in a quote-unquote like worse area outside the city, like an area that's still recovering, that doesn't have the safety, where you don't know if you people because they can stab you in your back here and not face any consequences, unlike inside the city. And if you want that dynamic, like a versus, like, is it better to live outside the city in a harsher environment where people can do anything they want against you, but you at least have free will and stuff like that? Or is it better to live inside a city where everything is regulated, and if you make a wrong move, then that's just that?
One of the things you could do if you wanted everybody's trapped inside the city is have some sort of colossus or something like that. There are a group of entities that are just beyond the capabilities of the current civilization to deal with. And the city just provides a supernatural level of protection against them, because it could potentially be one of them and they just don't know it.
It's all
Okay,
just an
so
experiment
maybe
by the mass army.
So maybe the city isn't necessarily a god, but perhaps it's treated as a god when it's really just this one incredibly powerful being that's more powerful than most of the other creatures roaming about the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that how most gods are made?
Essentially, yeah. I mean, it just early on it did feel a little weird to have the religious people worshiping the city as though it was a god and everything, because it would just be a very, very small god.
I mean,
it's a city. It's
technically you
everything
could
to them.
technically you could also go with they believe it's an extension of their god or something to that effect. It just happens to follow the rules that they want, and they have ways of making it ignore certain people. But to everybody else, it's the wrath of their god striking them down.
So if they were to ignore certain people, or if the city were to ignore certain people, what would people be doing to cause it to ignore them? Is there some sort of a sacrifice they have to make? Something to keep the city satiated? What is it?
First thought was like human sacrifices, but I feel like there's enough death in this world without that.
So you could either do the human sacrifice route, or just have it that anybody living there has to be like at least not an enemy of the religion. So they could totally be like, if you use magic or if you use this type of thing, you're not allowed in here. And then anybody else can come in, but they have to follow the rules. Otherwise, the city will smite them.
So if there are people who aren't affected, there's kind of two ways this can go about. One of them is that, they need like a blessing of sorts from a god, and they have to do something to get that blessing. Or the other thing is that these people are actually the ones controlling the city. Like, they're the ones who program the rules into the city. It's not actually a god, it's actually people. And both of those I feel like have a lot of pros and cons. I personally kind of want to lean more to an actual like deities there, and these guys are worshiping it and they're doing something, because I think that's an interesting dynamic of like, why would a god ignore certain people or give certain people privileges over the other? The other one just feels very almost overused, ignore the man behind the curtain type thing.
Yeah, I'm personally down with either one.
I feel like one of them is definitely easier. Like, it's definitely easier just to say, oh, the people are controlling it, more so than to say, like, there is a deity and now they have to do something and, like, justifying.
See, I'm a huge fan of Lovecraftian or cosmic horror. So the idea that it's some sort of entity that doesn't even really necessarily care about them, or like that they exist there. It's just kind of like having ticks or fleas, but they are able to manipulate it to react to certain things is an interesting idea. You could say through either tech or magic that they are able to force a reaction in certain areas whenever somebody is doing something they don't like.
So would this thing be like connected to people's thoughts or their emotions, or? Because I'm interested what it's actually reading. If it's just reading body language, so you actually an action you're committing, or if it's actually able to see into your thoughts and your intentions and be able to even stop you before you do something.
I think it would actually be better for story purposes, or at least one story that I had in mind. Depends on the type of story you want to write. But a story that I had in mind, it would be better if if the city wasn't able to read thoughts and emotions and stuff, and instead just sort of watch what you're doing. Because an idea for a story I had in mind was that you could have a group of people who are trying to break the law somehow, like perhaps commit some sort of a heist, and they're trying to not get caught by the city that sees everything, or they're trying to assassinate somebody, but they don't want to get caught by the city. And the way they could do it is by planning out some things to occur and set up some circumstances where they will accidentally, quote unquote, cause someone's death, like an accidental death, or accidentally have some equipment go haywire and break down the wall that happens to be the bank. And then while they're going and then maybe they have the job to rebuild the wall or whatever, no one's watching them because they expect the city to watch them, and so there's no need for surveillance. And then in the process, they might find some sort of way to sneak some money past the city's eyes, or however it sees people. Like, that's the sort of thing I was thinking, where if it knew your thoughts and emotions, that sort of story could not happen.
Yeah. I do find it interesting that I honestly think murdering someone would be easier than a bank heist.
Yeah, that's actually true, because like all you have to do is maybe somehow accidentally have just like a couple of rocks in the road or brick or something that causes your vehicle to run off the road and then crash, that sort of thing.
I left this argument fell out of my bed by accident. The city doesn't realize that it wasn't an accident, and it accidentally caused someone to die. And then if you act horrified by this and apologetic, the city will probably believe you. Because I mean, or maybe it won't. I don't know how a city would feel about like accidental murders or
Well,
things.
if it's being controlled by some people, then it depends on the people running the religion and everything.
If it is a deity, like an actual entity that's programmed to do things like to react to things, then I don't think it matters if it's an accident or not. It's not going to see it as that. It just saw, oh, this happened, this person did it.
But staging accidents would be a good way to essentially assassinate people.
Yeah, where it's like you stage the accident, you leave the room, and then it occurs.
Quick question.
What I'm thinking is like you stage an accident, and the person that you're wanting to die is like, oh my God, it's an accident. And then however the execution happens, that person's gone now. It was basically like all it saw was thing happened and it reacted to the result.
Yeah. So, quick question. Can the city read?
Can the city read? That. Well, I think we still have to determine if it's a city that is a god-like creature or if it's being controlled or what. Because if it's just an animal, I don't think it could read.
Yeah, it could.
I would say godlike entity, but it's not as involved as everybody thinks it is. Is more of an interesting take on it.
Yeah, because I'm wondering if like a kid could have a journal and write like all their horrible thoughts and terrible ideas and stuff, and the city just not realize that's what they're doing. Or like if you're planning a heist or a murder, you just never talk about it. You just write things, and in which case would writing become a suspicious activity? Would reading become almost illegal or something, like creating language and stuff like that that's written because it's becoming a method of people working around the rules and regulations. So now all of a sudden you have people who are a city that's watching out for people who's learning how to read.
Ooh.
Do we have an illiterate city? Because
I feel like since we're going with like a religious organization basically running the city, I feel like they would essentially have inquisitions and further try to carry out what they would say is the will of the city for the ones that aren't like obvious cause and effect type things. So like somebody doing like what sedition, insurrection, terrorism, things like that doesn't involve, oh, that guy exploded. That would be something where they would enforce it that way to cause further restrictions.
Something I was wondering about with the whole text and reading thing was what if this religion did ban reading and writing and stuff because that would be seen as an illegal activity. It's too suspicious, and the city is trained to react to that. However, maybe they had their own religious texts. Either they could have their own religious texts, and that's the only reading and writing that's allowed, or no, I'm losing my thought. Okay, so they have their own religious texts, and maybe if you were to perform some sort of crime, you could pretend as though you were reading off of religious text or handing someone religious text. The city wouldn't know the difference. But if you can fool the city, then you could still pass notes and stuff with plans.
I feel like since the religious organization is kind of like we're kind of leaning towards them being in control, having the occasional just like somebody's acting suspicious enough, they send the Inquisition in, they drag them out, find whether it's actual material that is not like approved by the religion, or it's planted, they drag them out into the street and then have the city execute them.
Just more death.
So actually, now I gotta wonder: is the city purely a surveillance system, or is it a surveillance and judgment system? Because we're talking about this Inquisition going out and killing people and capturing them and everything. But if the city has its own judgment system, then they wouldn't need to do that. The city would kill them itself. So does the city just alert the Inquisition and the religion, or the religious people, or does it take action itself? So I think it might be more interesting if it didn't take action. It just gives a couple more opportunities for a story, I think, where it's just a couple more small ways that are still risky, but the protagonist still could get one over on the city.
So I think having the city be like more reactionary, where it doesn't really care, like it does carry out sentences, but it doesn't dole out the judgment for it. And then the like this Inquisition, the Inquisitors are like capable of screaming out random prayers that are supposed to mean something. In reality, it's just letting somebody on the other end know to get the city to react and do whatever the execution method is to take care of this person that they're dragged out into the street. And it also gives it more potential for like the higher ups to abuse it that way, so that way there's even more reason for like a group of people to want to revolt. Is you've got this oppressive regime that controls the city and uses it to essentially take out anybody they consider rivals of any kind.
Well, first, these people would have to realize that the city is not a god, and then they would revolt.
Well, I think an interesting dynamic that the city allows is the city having, like, really, especially considering we are leaning more towards it being fully sentient, which I personally would like, because the idea of the city backstabbing the religious group, like deciding to side with someone else for whatever reason, and the idea of one person building a relationship with an entire freaking city just sounds like an interesting story. Like somehow this one person's connecting with the city on a deeper level than even like the religious people are, and then they're finding they can get away with things that they probably shouldn't be able to. And
so, like, we could go with the idea that like the city doesn't actually notice average citizens or the Inquisition or whatever. It's just kind of doing its own thing and occasionally doing the equivalent of scratching an itch. But the main character has somehow managed to get the city to notice him or her.
Yeah, it's broken down a barrier somehow, whether that be like just through its interactions with it, or I want to kind of avoid the chosen one trope, but there's always the chosen one trope.
I have an idea.
And then this person,
person
being able to lead resistance against it.
You could always go with an entire organization has realized what is actually going on and is working to actually get in contact with the entity rather than just causing it to react to things that you want it to.
Well,
because I do think the only way to survive the city, or like to gain freedom from what's happening, is to win over the city, to get it to notice you in a more positive light.
Yeah, that is kind of what I was thinking could happen. Because what if, because clearly the Inquisition, the religion, whatever, they need to somehow train the city to do what they want. And I think that they could do it by giving the city maybe some sort of a food that it eats, giving it something that it likes, doing something that the city enjoys, that the city appreciates, to help reinforce the city's to help condition the city to enforce their religion. And I'm thinking,
Turning
what if
the
this
relationship from parasitic to symbiotic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what I'm thinking is, what if this protagonist accidentally did whatever the thing was that the city likes, found out that the city appreciates it, and continued to do this thing to build that relationship.
You do have to be careful though with stories like that, because there's a lot of them where you have a person does this thing and you look at them and be like, yeah, so why hasn't more people done that thing and figured this out?
And
Like, why is this one person special enough to figure it out?
That's the big thing. It's got to be
You
something.
lose
So-
characters so fast, like readers so fast or listeners.
Perhaps having a forbidden area that they're not allowed to visit, and there have been people that visited.
Perhaps it's
I'm
a
trying to think
forbidden
of-
area where a specific task needs to be accomplished. And this forbidden area is where the Inquisition generally goes to do their specific task. It could be, I don't know, the mouth of the city, who knows, where they feed it something.
Here's an idea. How about we have the Inquisition doing it wrong, and then one of their number does it right once and realizes what's going on. He's been indoctrinated for so long that he's seeing the change in the reaction that they're getting, kind of like
So it's
turns
so pretty much
his turns
Yeah.
his world upside down.
So
Okay,
it's
so I
kind
have
of
a
like
weird.
the religious.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so you have this religious group. Yeah, I'll get that out there eventually. You have this religious group, and over the years, because this is a long-term world, I'm assuming, over the years, this religious group has gotten to the point where maybe they even start believing in their ceremonies and that this is actually real and that this entity is a deity of sorts and stuff like that. And they have their system and things like that. One person makes a mistake in the thing and then they watch as it reacts differently. Almost everyone else kind of just accepts this as this person did a mistake, move on with life, but the other person suddenly realizing, oh, maybe this entity has more feelings and ideas than we first thought, and maybe I should start experimenting with it. And they do. And the reason they start doing this is because they're in that place of power enough to make that mistake to realize it.
I have a bit of a weird idea. You're gonna have to let me know if this is too weird or not to work. But what if this Inquisition, this religion, whenever somebody violated their religion, they execute the person and then feed it to the city, like through the mouth of the city that I had mentioned earlier. But the city does not appreciate human sacrifice and humans as food and would prefer something like plants, but that's all it keeps getting fed. But these religious people don't know that, and so they're starving the city of all of the any plants that it might normally get, and the city understands that if I direct them to humans, they will throw the humans in, but if I direct them to plants, they'll just ignore it.
The issue then becomes like, one, how is that correlating, and two, why hasn't it just decided to go in search of food?
Yeah.
What if the city is either unable to move or it moves really slowly because like it's just so big, it's hard, and it's somewhat maybe like buried into the ground, like its bottom half is like essentially sitting in a crater, that it's hard for it to move around and get food, and it's hard to move that food into its mouth. It needs some assistance.
Then normally something like that would either be sitting in food, or it would be doing something to the effect of like finding creatures that would feed it what it wants.
Well, that's sort of what the humans are doing. It's trying to find the humans to feed it. And also maybe it once was sitting in a place where it could get food, but then the location it was sitting at ran dry, or maybe there's a drought or something. It killed vegetation, and it was no longer able to feed. And then these.
I think humans would be in order for this to work, humans would have to be like a valid food source. But it might have a favorite food that's not humans, and that could be where the difference lies. But like, it's content as long as it's being fed, and it doesn't really care what it's being fed. But then suddenly there's a person who's like, I wonder if it prefers this or this, and starts like experimenting, and it actually appreciates variety for, I'm sure all of us appreciate variety in our diet.
I feel like having the city capable of movement would make a lot more sense, though, because you're talking about something large enough for it to be considered a city. It's going to need pretty large quantities of food, so like the manufacturing of corpses is not, unless we're talking like a Warhammer 40K like hive city sized city, it's not going to manufacture enough corpses to feed something that size.
I mean, but it's also, there's other means of food. Like, so we often on this podcast have things being fed by stuff like human emotions or memories or things like that. So, the idea of like the soul being able to feed something, like a little bit of soul being able to fill a creature of mass size a lot better than, say, like plants or something like does, is a pretty common thing in worlds like this.
So I think that maybe they would have to, their execution process would have to be throwing a living person into the pit, into the mouth or whatever. Because if you kill a person and then throw them in, their soul, I would say, is gone.
Yeah.
Like it's already moved on.
Yeah. So, but
then you'd have to ask what happens to the souls after they're eaten. Do they just sort of cease to exist?
It turns into it's a depressing world. But also, one thing to think is like this whole mouth idea, I think, kind of negates some of the fear of the city, because now you do have to be caught by someone in a way. Like, sure, the city alerts them, but then you have to be found. Well, before we had the city and if you do something wrong, the city at any point can just open up and you're gone and kill you. And I think that was the intriguing part about this world, was that you don't know if at any point the city is going to turn on you. And I think if we just have the big one mouth that they're feeding things in, we lose that element.
Okay, so if we want to go back to how it was before with the mouth opening up wherever, I think we would need to change a couple of things in terms of how the city works. But for the most part, I think it could remain the same.
Yeah.
The giant mimic idea actually kind of comes a little more like it, because of the fact that a mimic is kind of an amorphous creature and can imitate shapes of things. Like, having the idea that they're living inside of a giant mimic kind of like prevents the idea of, well, where's the mouth coming from? Like, well, how does it open up in the right places? Do they have to drag it to a fucking manhole cover? Like,
Yeah.
it prevents a lot of that kind of issue.
It also explains why like all the walls and the buildings are part of the city. It's because the city's designing it. Like, something that these religious people, this organization, would be in charge of is managing design of the city and like requesting new buildings to be built and designed. And it's just this entity growing parts and shape shifting in ways to be more accommodating for more people as it grows and stuff like that, or shrinks. We don't know.
And if it's food or motivated, and the Inquisition is basically like, you eat this guy, and then all we want to do is live here. If we tell you which ones to eat, then it seems like a pretty good deal for a mimic.
Yeah, but you gotta ask, why doesn't the mimic just eat everyone?
Because it's farming food. It's not dumb.
Yeah, at that size, they would theoretically be intelligent enough to realize if it ate everything on top of it right now, what's it going to do later?
Yeah, but what does
It's
it care about, like, in terms of which ones to eat? Why does it care about the moral judgment system? It,
because if
That's the
I
cool thing. It doesn't.
yeah, but here's the thing, Isaac. If people, if you're gonna live, no one's gonna live in a town in which you could randomly get eaten. People would leave. And I think that they've managed to convince the city of that. Like they've managed to the city has enough intelligence to realize that if it breaks its moral code that it's been given to how to eat things, then everyone in the city would leave and it would lose its food source that way.
okay, so now you've got now we got a situation of, what if the mimic is getting hungry enough to where it's gonna try and sneakily eat someone, like, without like, it'll just like,
You
it's
ever
gonna
wondered? You ever wondered why the city has no poor people, no beggars on the streets?
Oh my gosh. Don't go down a dark alley by yourself. You might not come out. And that could be a thing. There could be like a whole boogeyman aspect to this, where there is still some fear of like if you go down an alley, you could just disappear for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think
And
I think it might be a normal thing to always let people know where you're going, what your plans are for the day, so that everyone knows what is happening. Everyone is always aware of what
Yeah,
everybody's doing,
'cause if
so
you're-
that if you disappear, people can assume that the mimic ate you. And
But they're going to assume you did something wrong. Because that's the thing. The mimic is only going to sneak these people if there's no one around to watch them eat it. In which
And
case,
if
people
the
are going to think you did
person's
something wrong. And that's why they're dead.
and if the person doesn't tell people what they're doing, where they're going, and aren't public with it, essentially, then there must be planning something because they're being all sneaky like about it.
Yeah.
So it's perfectly fine to eat them.
I just wanted to plan a birthday party.
Oh my God.
And
No
now
surprise
your
birthday
lunch.
Yeah, no surprise birthday parties. They're deadly.
Yes. Yeah, but yeah, I'm just thinking, yeah, that could work.
And
If
again,
you're,
I think souls can feed it in a better way. Like it takes less weight of a soul than it does for us to like eat food constantly. So it can maintain the creature. And you know, the bigger the city grows, the bigger the creature grows. The more the creature has to rely on the city because now it's at the point where if it loses the city, it will starve. It'll die. There's no way it's going to be able to find a food source to maintain it again at this point. Like it's aware of this, and the religious people are aware of this. And what's happening is that another group is becoming aware of this, and now the city's going to get options, and that's when things get interesting.
oh, so the city now has to pick sides,
Yeah,
and so everybody's
Who's
trying
gonna
to.
feed me
it's like
better?
That's pretty much it. It's like they gotta
Yeah.
somehow convince the people of the city why their religion is superior, and while also
so you don't have to convince the
convincing.
people; you just have to convince the city, pretty much.
Yeah,
The people, the moment you have
The
the
people
city
are
on your
just
side,
lunch.
the people are
They just
yeah,
don't
the
know it
people are
yet.
going to fall in line. Yeah.
yeah, it's. I'm just thinking that you would still probably have to do both: convince the city and convince the people, because the people might leave, and if they leave, then yeah, I think that might be a determining factor in which side the mimic
That's actually a
chooses.
good. Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good point. Because if you are say you're the Inquisition, you've been usurped. You start yelling and screaming about religious things that they've taken the city from us, and we must leave now to find a new city. And there goes half the food source. Now you look really good too. And the city has no real choice but to basically enforce its own, like, if you try and leave, I'll eat you. If you do things that I don't like, I'll eat you. If you just exist in the wrong spot at the wrong time, I'll eat you.
That's an interesting idea too. Like a first story is that the city just goes rogue. There's this division, and people are threatening to leave, and now the city's panicking. And how does this creature respond to that? And all of a sudden, this creature that could care less, it was just enjoying its food and getting to grow and live its life. All of a sudden, has to learn politics.
Yes.
And
It's
just
a-
like that, we turned it into a grimdark comedy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think that works. Do we want to world build beyond the city, or do we want to end it here. Like,
I think
we
I
barely
think the
touched
city's
beyond the
good.
city.
I think the city was the highlight of this, and we don't really have to go beyond. I think just the idea that people can leave, and that's something that this entity has to be aware of, is all that we really need to know. But that it's difficult to leave still. Like, it's not nice out there. You can survive, but it's not nice. It's nicer in the city. Even with the threat of, if you're trying to plan a surprise birthday party, you might get eaten because you're sneaky.
It's just nicer in the city than out.
Yeah.
You could have it anywhere from post-apocalyptic. I swear I can English events, or like just roving bands of monsters that make life difficult for anything larger or anything smaller than a large city.
So that can be on the, whoever wants to pick up the story and write it. Because one thing we do on this podcast is all of the stuff that we do here is for use. Like, if someone wants to write a book or make a movie or TV series or whatever based off of it, feel free. We don't own this. It's for
If
the
that pops
public.
up, I want to see it.
Yes, yeah, that's one thing. We're like, we would love if you just sent it to us so we could see it. And I think that's the goal one day, is to, you're scrolling through Netflix one day and you're like, hey, this looks familiar. That'd be the dream. But yeah, I think I'm personally pretty pleased with this. I think the idea of a mimic of sorts, giant city that has to learn politics, but also eats people, is, again, like, it's the grim comedy of sorts. And it's an amusing concept that I think would be good for. I'm thinking TV series personally would be the more interesting genre to take with it, but it could be an interesting book too.
Yeah, I'm wondering how long of a story this could actually go for.
You could get some seasons, I think.
I mean, I was thinking a single movie, but
A movie could be fun too.
But it could, I mean, you could turn it into a show. Especially if you were to have multiple stories of people trying to avoid the mimic and the religion and the Inquisition and keep on committing all these crimes like I was talking about. Again, like these heist stories and assassination stories, all trying to bypass this gigantic, crazy, sentient surveillance system, just seems interesting to me.
I feel like you'd eventually, if you did a show, you'd eventually have to expand it beyond the city, though.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, but at the same, I do think it's interesting that you have this overarching plot of a city figuring out politics, and in between you have these people making decisions, and you might just follow one group for an episode and another group for an episode, and you have no clue who's going to just end up getting eaten at any point, and it could just happen in weird, bizarre ways that really shock people, but at the same time kind of makes sense because that's just the world that they live in, and the city has to make these decisions that affect if it gets to survive or not, or if the people get to. It's an interesting show.
Mm-hmm.
We get a lot of places, which are my favorite type. But I think that's a good place to end it. Thank you, Nameless, for joining us on this.
No problem.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming aboard to our weird podcast where we think up weird things like mouths in the ground.
I was thinking more of a hole, but sure, if you want to give it teeth.
I think that the mimic can create teeth for itself when it swallows people.
It wants to. It's just spikes on the way down that squeeze in. This is a rated mature show.
It's a meat grinder.
Yeah. But yeah, that's a good place to end it. We'll be back next week, where I think we're doing a Christmas special. I'm saying in the podcast now we have to do a Christmas special. So we'll build a Christmas themed world next week. So less murder, hopefully. Maybe. We'll see.
Little did you know you're building Krampus's workshop.
Violent
we did
night.
that last year. So we can't do it this year. We already made the anti-Santa, so we'll try not to do that.
We named him Tanas.
We did name him Tanas. It's Santa backwards.
We're Santa backwards. We went through a couple of weird translation explanations as to how we got to Tanas, but one of them was it's reversed.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll leave it off here. see you guys next week. Goodbye.
Don't forget to drink water.
Water is important. That's a very important thing to remember.
Everyone's already left the podcast. They're gone already, guys.
Bye.
It
always happens. The outro goes for like 30 minutes. It's just like